Welcome everyone to the Modern SaaS Podcast, another episode with new guest, and I'm super excited to introduce Aman Singh. Aman, welcome to the pod.
Very glad to be here, Aditya. Thanks for inviting me.
Awesome. And Aman, I've been following you. We've connected on LinkedIn for a while now, and you have been sharing some amazing content. And that's what I thought. Looking at your background, I felt this would be a perfect guest for the topics that we typically talk about. Just to give context to the audience, Aman has been a 4 times sales leader, has seen amazing high growth successes from 0 to 20, 30 million in ARR. He had grew companies. He had also seen a lot of failures as well. And I felt that was the combination of some of the stories that you share, some of the advice that you share. It would be great to share that knowledge with the rest of the audience. Aman has been a founder of the Curious Consultant. Aman, let's start there. What's the story behind the name? And what is Curious Consultant?
Good question around the name. So I noticed, people used to ask me, why have I been this successful? They're defining success in their terms. I still don't see myself as super successful. I'll always be a work in progress. But if I really thought about that deeply, and this actually came in Vipassana during one of my Vipassana retreats, that the only reason for my success, if I had to choose one trait, is that I'm insatiably curious. I'm just very curious to know how people see the world, how I see the world, what are these subconscious things that we are not even aware of that are real, and what does reality mean to different people? So, and like the basics every day, like how does this work? How does that work? So curiosity has been a big strength for me, and in different roles, like I've been data analyst, a product manager, a product marketing guy, then shifted to sales. So that's why I wanted that word curious to show up for my personal brand. And the consultant probably, so if you see TC, the initials start with TCC, the Curious Consultant, and it refers to trainer, consultant, and coach.
Yeah.
And obviously, it's a huge backstory around it. Probably, I don't think that's relevant for this particular podcast, but we can cover that later.
No, but I love it. I think I do talk about this being naturally curious. It's my number one advice and feedback when I work with the team internally and even to the external teams or external other founders. And it's so well said, like by bringing that in your brand name itself, it's a constant reminder that you cannot let go the general curiosity and natural curiosity. So I think it's a great way of seeing that name. When I was obviously following your LinkedIn content, what came very clear that you were talking a lot about also failures. And that's something when you see out on LinkedIn, people always talk about all the success things that they've closed, $200 million and this much pipeline they've generated. And I get it. People want credibility till they start with all the success that they've seen. But also when you talk about failures, there's something else. It's a lot to get over with before you share it. Why you started sharing some of your failures, and how do you see why people don't talk about it? Do you recommend people talking about failures on LinkedIn, and have you seen any kind of benefits? Like, I would love to just understand the taboo that people have talking about failures. How do you think about it?
So, okay, let's take a step back. What changed in humanity in the last 10, 15 years? With the advent of social media platforms, what I saw, what started happening was Instagram or LinkedIn, like multiple platforms, everybody chooses to share the best parts of their life, like their biggest wins. They bought a new car, they bought a new home, and they closed a new deal from a sales perspective. And that's what people start seeing on an everyday basis. And for our generation probably, and I'm like mid-30s, so we've seen the non-social media days and we've seen social media days. What I noticed was I started comparing, and I usually, whenever I say I'm sharing a lot of content, I'm just sharing a lot of my personal experiences and from whom I have learned. So I started noticing that once I started being very active on Instagram and LinkedIn, I was constantly reminded of these wins. And it just seemed that everybody else was winning continuously. And probably I was doing something wrong. So that was my first reaction. And I noticed that reaction. The second bit I noticed was when I had these conversations with the Gen Zs of the world today. I mean, they live in a world of instant gratification. They want everything now without probably putting in a lot because that's their reality. That's what they see on Instagram or LinkedIn. And it's basic human psychology. We remember the good parts about others. We probably amplify the bad parts about ourselves, and we underestimate our own strengths, and we overestimate the strengths of others. So that's why I felt, okay, let's normalize failure a little bit. And in sales specifically, I've tried to do that a lot, and I felt like the question to your benefit point is, once you normalize failure, especially in early stage sales, like I've been part of a lot of early stage startups. Failure is not an option in early stage startups. When you're doing sales, as a first sales hire or a second sales hire, you're bound to fail. From my perspective, your goal should be to fail fast and learn from that failure and probably build a better product or a better solution that really solves the pain of, and you'll have a lot of hypotheses, right? Like you're a founder. You would have had at least 10 different hypotheses once you started a 𝗩𝗚𝗑. And you can tell me about your experience, like how many of these hypotheses were actually true? And when you went out in the market, like there is a story that you tell yourself in your head, and there is a story that your prospects feel at that point in time.
Yeah. No, I think the hypothesis journey also, I wouldn't say we were, so that the way I should say, the failure, we did not get a lot on the hypothesis that we had.
Awesome.
I think it was more around throughout the journey, how many other rejections we got. So the failures I had were always, and it goes back because we were doing a lot of research around curiosity. I made sure that before I found my hypothesis very strongly, I had a little bit of hypothesis that the meetings, the way it was done, it was inefficient. So that was my very core at the beginning. And I felt we need to automate a lot of these things. And there's a lot of these low value things I do, and I don't want to do that. And I want to spend my time on the good things. We still, I would say, looking back, still in that similar space. But in that journey, we had many other rejections and failures across the board. Some decisions were wrong. Or when we try to hire people, we made some wrong decisions. We tried to raise capital. We got a lot of rejections, a lot of failures there. We lost years where I think we could have been probably 2x, 3x where we are at today. But some of the mistakes from a strategy point of view we made, those were failures. So I think we saw a lot of failures that way.
But how do you see those failures? That's the most important thing. I mean, if you see these failures as checkpoints in your journey to success, if you believe that you can only fail your way to success and there is no other way, and there are enough and more examples out there, right? This is not just theory we are talking about. And a lot of our listeners probably would know Michael Jordan, right? Like everybody knows Michael Jordan.
Yeah.
So there's this amazing quote by him where he says that I have probably taken 9,000 shots and missed. 26 times I have been given the final shot of the game, which I had to make to win, and I missed that. And he talks about countless other failures. And it's like, this is the reason I succeed. This is the reason I'm as good as I am. And it's not just, I mean, sports, it's easy to see failures as stepping stones to success. Another of my favorite examples that I keep on reminding myself also is Jack Ma, like the founder of Alibaba, like probably one of the richest person in the world at one point in time. He says that there was a point in my life when I applied for a job as a server in KFC. 24 people applied with him. Only 23 got in. I was the only one who did not get in.
Wow.
Then I applied to Harvard 10 times. 10 times they rejected me. I failed.
Wow.
But that's the reason I win.
That's amazing.
So it's important to see these failures as checkpoints. And another interesting thing that I noticed was, have you noticed that if is the only grade of the letter which corresponds to failure. A, B, C don't correspond to excellence. Like it is built in our subconscious that F is bad, avoid F, avoid failure. Like you should run away from failure. And probably like that is true in the North American context, even more true in the Indian context. Because we're supposed, like it's a sin to fail in school, right? And you are ostracized from the society. So like all of these things have been drilled in us. And that's why we start seeing failure in a particular way. And a lot of us, like both of us are engineers, a lot of us are very mathematical people, and we see a lot of charts. So in our head, this looks like success, right? Like a straight line going up. But the fact is, and the reality is, success is like this. It's probably looks more like an ECG, which is upward trending. But it always comes up and down. And when you're coming down, it doesn't mean you're failing. Life is setting you up for a bigger success. You just need to learn and see those failures as teachers, learn from them, and just move ahead. And don't take it personally. I mean, have fun with it.
And you have started sharing these stories, has it? Because how would people, I think the fundamental what you're trying to suggest is the mindset is important, that embrace failure and most importantly, learn from those failures. Those are stepping stone to your success that you want to get, that you're not seeing it yet. And I think I've seen some people have started doing it on LinkedIn. How do you encourage people to be vulnerable, to be authentic? Have you seen any benefits by doing that, especially on LinkedIn?
So again, a layered question. I'll answer the exact question like in probably a minute. But let's talk about vulnerability first. I mean, that's the underlying concept here. And it's one of my favorite ones actually. So as a first time manager, what I tried to do was seem perfect. Like I had all the right answers. I knew everything. I was strong. And I could just help you with all the solutions. But what I realized over a period of time, and there is a lot of psychology, human psychology, and a lot of research behind this, which says that we don't connect with people who seem perfect. We don't want to work with leaders who seem perfect at all times. Like we connect more with people who are open about their learnings, experiences, failures, who talk about it openly. And it's just natural. Like I can think of a lot of, like I was probably lucky with really good leaders who kind of were open with talking about their failures. I mean, Wayne, the current CRO of a firm, Vassal, I had brilliant leaders. They were very open with like concepts like these. And even back in India, the leaders I had with Geo. So I was lucky to grow up hearing about some of these stories, and it helped me connect with them even better. Like I could see where they were at this point in time, but I knew where they were probably 10 years earlier, and they were failing a lot at that point in time. So that's what made me feel that, okay, this person is not untouchable. This person is not a superhuman. He or she is as normal as I am. And if they can make it, I can definitely do it. Like it gives you a sense of confidence and it inspires you. Like as an experiment, I started doing this with my team first, like probably not on social media to start with, but with my team first. And I noticed a lot of people started coming to me openly with their problems. Like, okay, I probably am not the best code coder. My default mode is emailing. Help me understand this. And as a leader, as a coach, as a manager, you will only be able to help people if they're open to sharing their experiences with you. And then you have the buy-in also, because they know you've been through this journey. Then they will change their behavior also. Otherwise, it's just simple theory. Like you can keep on harping on the same stuff, keep on telling, okay, you should do multi-network approach, multi-platform approach, you should do this and that. But that's just theory. They've not felt it. So it needs to come from them. And that's what I've seen has happened with me a lot. Like I'm extremely close friends with all of my existing teams. And a lot of people I still work with. And I'm grateful for that. And even on LinkedIn, like my yesterday's post, I mean, I was just in a headspace where I was thinking about, okay, all my failures, and I had a certain conversation that triggered that. And I just posted it. And there are just too many strangers out there with whom it resonated. It made sense. It's like, okay, this is the same point. I am on this journey. And they probably see me as successful, even if I don't. And for them, it's like, okay, if I do these small, simple things, small actions on a consistent basis, I can get to that level. So that's how you kind of inspire people. That's how it motivates. It has motivated me. It has inspired me. And I kind of try to replicate the same. And there is enough research behind, like the best talk I would say is there is a TED talk on the power of vulnerability. I don't remember exactly who that person was, but we can share the links. It's a mind-blowing TED talk, kind of changed the way I saw vulnerability. And probably only after that TED talk, I started doing it very openly.
How do you bring this vulnerability or being authentic in our sales conversations and providing this, what we call, if I think about the modern SaaS experience, the selling experience or the buying experience that buyers are expecting? How do you bring these elements? We talked about it in LinkedIn, and to grow your network, grade your support, inspire some other people. How does that translate this, who you are becoming in a day-to-day selling experience?
So if I really think about it, like on a lot of my discovery calls, and I'm a big believer in 80% of your deals are won on Austin discovery. On a lot of these discovery calls, sometimes I've noticed, and especially young AEs and SDRs, they shy away from leading with the fears people have. Like they shy away from leading with where their product is probably deficient or probably will not solve the pain, because they feel that if they talk about the deficiencies, then they might not be able to close the sale. And as sales is, I mean, our closing the sale is directly related to our commissions. So there is a conflict of interest in that sense. But what has happened with me is when I lead with these elephants in the room, with these fears, and I just tell them openly, okay, I feel you might be thinking that this is not the right fit because I'm taking an example of a bigger company, or it might not be the right fit for you in this space, or you might be fearing that I'm promising you the sun and the moon and the stars because that's what serious people do. And if I lead with some of these fears, and if I'm vulnerable enough to talk about them, and some of the failures also, like I have closed a few clients for whom the product was not the right fit. I mean, I was very well intentioned. I did a lot of discovery, but we figured out that, okay, it was not the right fit, parted ways on a good basis. And I learned a lesson there that this is why it was not the right fit. And I lead with those lessons in my next call. And that builds the side effect is it builds a lot of trust that he does not. And a lot of times I have gotten that feedback that you don't seem like a salesperson. You seem more like a product manager. And I tell them I was a product manager. And you seem more like a data guy. And I tell them I was a data analyst to start with. So that builds trust. And they know that even though it is in my interest to close them and for my commissions, I am still not going to do that if I don't feel it's the right fit for them.
You have a very unique background where you started as an engineer, product manager, and then now product marketing also. Now you mentioned data background also you had, and then you became a sales, initially individual sales rep, and then now a sales leader. You had talked about this, taking extreme ownership as a salesperson to become successful and having these kind of skills. So tell us, the audience, like most of the salespeople don't have this experience or background, but why do you believe that they need to have these extra skills to be really successful, and they need to take ownership of these other things?
So extreme ownership is again one of my one of the most interesting things that I've kind of learned over time. And again, this is a book. I again don't forget the name of the author, but we can share that. Mind-blowing book. It's by a Navy SEAL who talks about how extreme ownership prevents the death of their fellow comrades and how they practice it. But the way I see it in corporate is, and as an early stage sales rep probably, I mean, the way I see it, if you are in the seed, Series A, Series B kind of a zone where you're not just selling, but you're figuring out the product market fit. You're trying to define exactly what product features to build. You're trying to define what's this repeatable playbook. I mean, you might be winning on a one-off basis, but can you define a repeatable sales motion? Like these are some of the answers everybody is trying to answer at this stage. And if you really want to answer these questions, one, you have to really deep dive into the pains of the customer and validate your hypothesis around. You have a story in your head that your solution solves this pain, but do they feel that pain? is that pain even real, or is that a latent pain which is just a story in your head?
Right.
If that pain is real, is it big enough? I mean, that's a pretty big blind spot for a lot of reps, where they feel that since the pain is real, they should solve it. I mean, all of these companies and we as people, we have like probably hundreds of problems to solve. We choose to solve some, we don't choose to solve others, and we try to live with it. So is the pain big enough and a priority for them to solve? Is the gain significantly better than the pain? And to understand all of these three things, and I didn't touch about the gain being significantly better. I mean, you will never change the status quo if the gain is just marginally better than the pain. It has to be significantly better than the pain, and then it needs to some kind of an action. So to answer these three questions primarily, which is a part of discovery and scoping, you need to act as or think as a product manager. You need to think as a founder, probably, not just as a product manager. And when I say product and product marketing, I mean, initial stages, there is probably, and some companies are lucky to have a lot of inbounds. Some companies, it's purely an outbound kind of a sale.
Yep.
And to crack the outbound code well, I would say, and I've done this too many times. I mean, with all my early stage companies, I used to be the one who was probably posting the most on LinkedIn about that company and the vision and the pain. And I used to just live in the problem space. I mean, that's another of my favorite things. It's called lips. Live in the problem space. You don't live in the solution space. So if you have to post on LinkedIn, you have to think like a product marketer. Like, okay, what pains are we trying to solve? What are they doing on their daily basis? At what points do they feel this pain? And how can I capture their attention during those points? Or how do I build trust? So it's a function. And I've noticed that probably North America is a very specialized society to a certain extent. Asia is a little bit more generalist in nature. And I never thought of myself as only an enterprise AE or a mid-market AE. I always thought of myself as a product manager, product marketer, like a guy who is wearing multiple hats. So if you start thinking like that, so your actions are defined by your thoughts. So if you start thinking in a certain way, you do certain actions. One feedback that I got at a firm, and I joined PayBright actually, which was a startup. It got acquired by a firm, then IPO'd. So one of the best feedbacks that I got when I left a firm was a small note by a customer success executive. It said that, Aman, if you were not there, and this is a letter, right? Like a handwritten note. And I still saved that if you were not there, probably there would have been a huge fight between customer success and sales. And why did that feedback come? Because I understood it's not easy. Like, there are a lot of issues that sales also brings up. We promise them the sun and the moon and the stars, and it falls on the customer success guys to solve that pain. I mean, the expectations are too high to match. And it's not like we feel that we brought in the business and they're not getting the right service, and that's why they're churning and I'm losing my commissions. But the fact is, these people are spending X number of hours without commissions in a lot of cases to just solve problems. They're living in the problem space their entire day. They're not getting any dopamine hits. Everybody comes to them with pain points and problems. And it's not easy. Like, I haven't had a lot of doctor friends, and it's not easy to be in that profession. So if you just step into their shoes, feel their pain, and then just preempt, okay, how can you make their life easy? If you think like a customer success guy, you will probably make their life easy by probably either telling them a lot of background context around that particular client, or also preempting, like what I've done in a lot of cases. I have preempted that this seems to be the personality of the person. Don't worry if they sound a bit rude or harsh, but it's just coming from a different place, but they are pretty smart and they want to figure out things for their business. So even these small little things create a lot of difference.
No, this is amazing. You said it so beautifully. Like, customer success people, they're not getting dopamine of closing new deals. They're getting bombarded with all these negative problems, issues, and they have to. So empathizing with them and understanding what our teammate is going through, and then working with them, collaborating with them, you as a salesperson, working with your customer success person, as a team, as the same team, rather than you're a different team, I'm a different team. And then you are able to provide a better experience to your customer. You're able to understand these problems and also give your colleague better life as a work-life balance here to make sure that they're happy with the work. Now, this is very well said. So, Aman, one of the things that you said interesting was the lips, live in the problem space. But I remember once you also said that salespeople think that they're problem solvers. You need to live in the problem space, but they're not problem solvers and they're problem definers. Can you elaborate more on that?
Definitely. So why do I feel, first of all, that salespeople are not problem solvers and problem definers? Or let me answer, how does that make a difference if you see yourself as a problem solver versus you see yourself as a problem definer? Now imagine Aditya is out selling a Boma to a particular customer and he thinks of himself as a problem solver. So the customer, like you started discovery, the customer will probably talk about some pain that he's focusing. And in your head, you'll be like, oh yes, I got a pain point. Let me tell them how to solve for this particular pain point.
Yeah.
So that's one. Two, and then you will definitely move to solutions, or you move to product, or you move to some stories around how this pain is solved for other folks and by a woman. But let's just see the second side of it. Now Aditya thinks he is the problem definer. He's not a problem solver. So the first time the person says something about the pain, you'll be curious to know, okay, is that real? Is he telling me about a symptom or the underlying disease? Because the fact is, most people talk about symptoms. And if we can think about ourselves, like when you go to a doctor, do you tell them the disease you had, or do you tell him or her the symptoms you have experienced?
Yeah.
Because for
Symptoms.
you, the symptoms are real. The disease, you don't even know probably, or you have not really thought it out. And that's true even in sales. Like people have experienced those symptoms and their pain is coming from those symptoms. So they talk about symptoms. And if you think of yourself as a problem definer, as probably a consultative salesperson, that's very commonly talked about. But what does that really mean? That you are questioning, okay, is this pain real? How does that affect your workflow? When is it felt? Could you tell me a little bit more? I'm curious to know about this pain. And if you talk like in these how and what open-ended questions multiple times, you will see that the prospect starts defining their pain point better. And you're just questioning them. You're just trying to help them define what's the cost of inaction here. Like, what if they don't solve the problem? Where do they go? What if they solve the problem? Like, is the return on investment even worth it in the first place? Like, going back to that same thing, is the gain significantly higher than the pain? And that's the third step. So as a problem definer, helping them define, okay, is there a pain? What's that pain? Is that latent pain or is that real felt pain? If it's real felt pain, why haven't you tried to solve it? And you never ask why. Like, what have you done to solve it historically? What has failed?
I love this.
And so as a problem definer, you will live in the problem space by default, and you'll start go deeper in the problem space. And when you start doing that, a beautiful thing happens.
That's amazing.
What happens is 90% of the problem solving happens automatically. Like, you don't have to solve problems for people. Like, they are the masters of their own universe. If you just help them define their problems well, if you show them what's the cost of inaction, quantify it for them. If you show them what's the return on investment, quantify it for them, they will automatically just ask you, okay, what's the price? And let's just close it. And you'll be able to sell at a premium. I mean, you are not solving a problem for them. You're just defining it for them. But they will choose to solve it for them.
This is a brilliant one. I've heard this for the first time, that I've heard it enough times that uncover the pain, multiple layer pain, all of that is fine. But the way you said, when they're coming to you, they're coming with a symptom as a problem. And the underlying pain is still something else, and help them realize that main problem, if they don't do certain things, that's still the real problem. They're going to go live with and experience it. Very well said. I love this advice.
Like, one of the signal that I get for myself, when I ask these questions, if from the symptoms, how do you know you've reached the disease? If the person starts talking in business terms as opposed to technical terms,
that gives you a signal that yes, you have reached somewhere closer to the real disease. And typically, on an average, it takes 3 to 5 what to how questions on an average. In an enterprise sale, might even take more. But the trick is, you need to know, okay, are they talking about in business outcomes? And if you can marry it to like the share price of the company or an executive priority, that's the time you will actually make a big sale. Like that's how enterprise sales is done. And that's where you'll be able to sell your product at a premium and not just at a discount. Now, this is also another brilliant thing. Like, how do you know that you have reached to that point or not? Sometimes buyers might come and say, here's our growth rate is dropping or our win rates are losing and that's why we want to fix the problem. Or they're starting, we need to do coaching, but why you need to do coaching? What prompted you to do the coaching? And so I think that qualification is really good, that once you start understanding the business problems, then you know, okay, finally you have something, then define that problem, articulate problem back to the prospect so that they understand, yes, this is what's the core reason why I'm looking for this solution. And so now you start selling at a premium price based on not the technical features that they were asking in the beginning, but now how it impacts the core business goal or initiative. I love this. Aman, the way you're explaining these things, the way I'm understanding, you have a very methodical way of explaining, obviously. So it comes across your background, engineering background, or that probably is helping you to communicate in this way. But there is this, if I try to stereotypically think about these things, normally these people are also mind their business, introvert, not the salesy one that you see who are extrovert. What have you seen in your career? How does that, were you an introvert or were you always an extrovert? How does that transition happen and how it helped you to become a great salesperson? It's I mean, I've never been able to answer if I am an introvert or an extrovert. I've tried to take the help of some psychometric tests, like MBTI is the most famous one. Interesting. Like even in MBTI, I'm a 52% E. So I'm marginally an E over an I. So it seems I'm a perfect ambivert, and I'm a perfect, I mean, I don't believe in perfection, but I'm very close to being an ambivert, and I've had phases, like probably as a teenager, in my early 20s, I was a big time extrovert, partying out all the time, driving my energy from sources outside of me. Then there was a point in time when I went too deep into meditation and traveled a lot solo and became more of an introvert, and probably both the worlds collided and I kind of became an ambivert. But to your point, and this is coming probably from a personal bias also, because I have been like this, but I've noticed there are two specific traits that, okay, let's define. Okay, one of the big things that I tell salespeople is define the words you're saying. Because the problem is you might be speaking the same words, but your definitions are very different and it means different things to you. So introvert also is a pretty strong word. So what do I mean by an introvert and an extrovert? To me, simply an introvert is a person who drives a lot of his energy. The source of their energy is inside them. Yeah. For an extrovert, the source of their energy is outside them. It's a function of where you drive your energy from and what gets you excited, what gets you motivated to a certain extent. Yeah. So let's go deeper into what are these introverted traits. So typically, if you notice a lot of introverted people, they are very attuned to your feelings. They're usually very good listeners. And they make you feel valued, they make you feel heard. And a lot of them are high on empathy, is what I've noticed. And it's a generalization, but that's usually what I've noticed. For extroverts, they're not really fearful of failure. I mean, they have seen this in their lives too many times. They've reached out to a lot of strangers. Somewhere it clicked, somewhere it didn't click. And so they're kind of okay with rejection. They don't take it personally. And they're not fearful of reaching out to strangers and striking conversations with them. And they're just naturally curious about their worldview of others. They want to know how others see it, how others think about it. While introverts are more concerned about, okay, how do I see it? And both, there is no good or bad here. I mean, both the traits are equally important. And I have noticed that if, and
obviously it's a personal bias because I am an ambivert and I think like this. But for a effective salesperson, like if you really think about it, they need to be attuned to the buyer's feelings.
Yeah.
They need to step into the shoes of the buyer and feel their pain, to feel that empathy. And then they need to derive their motivation from within. Like there is just so much rejection in sales that if you are constantly motivated by just your wins, I mean, at least in early stage sales, there is no way you will be able to sustain it, because you need to have that source of energy within, and that belief or that confidence or that consistency maybe. So
Yeah.
but you also need to pick up the phone, and you need to
Yeah.
reach out to strangers. You probably need to reach out to hundreds of people to find 10 right fit people who will help you learn. So that's why, I mean, if both the traits come together, and I've actively hired for a lot of ambiverts,
Interesting.
like a lot of signals that I started picking during interviews, and thankfully it has worked for me. Like it depends on every person is different. It might not work for others, but I have hired a lot of these, and I can think of a lot of faces are coming in my head right now.
Nice.
And a lot of those folks hit President Snub just straight out of college, like first year of an SDR, first year of being an AE, and you hit President's Club. And they're kind of disrupting the traditional sales folks who have like 3-4 years of experience, and they're plain ambiverts, a lot of them. I mean, I can think of a lot of examples who are plain extroverts who are good, who are plain introverts who are also good. But typically the world sees the sales, function as a function of extroversion, which is not true. And that's my personal observation.
No, and I think the way I try to stereotype engineering mindset as more of an introverted, there is also a stereotype of salespeople being extremely extroverted. And I think we've talked about this also in the past, where there's another level of perception stereotype that people have made. And I know this is a little controversial or hot topic to talk about, but it's when you think about salespeople, first of all, you see it's the white salesperson is pretty predominant. Women in sales, color in sales, these are the things that people don't talk about, but we have seen there have been incidents in the past that people have objected, can you actually do that kind of thing, right? Can you get into sales by being a person of color? I personally have, as a founder, have experienced this similar feedback, especially when we were building product for sales people and I wanted to sell to CROs and VP of sales. One of the investors on my face said, your background is great, but you need to hire a white salesperson. And I hated that statement. And I never will forget that investor. Will never recommend anybody in my life to ever apply for that investor or go to that investor. But it was important to me to understand at that time, not trying to get into racism, but this mindset still exists today. And I'm sure you must have also had your fair share of these things. How do you people stand out? Because the way I look at it, the sales has become global now. These things that you exactly mentioned, it's not introvert, extrovert. It's about people. People would have these things and they can do sales. Doesn't matter. It needs to be from certain background or certain color. Why? What have you experienced? How would you suggest your our listeners to overcome these biases and still be successful?
Very good question. So I remember a lot of personal stories as well. But let's go into the gender part first. Just a beautiful example. 2 of my favorite sellers at a firm were females.
Amazing.
My wife is an account executive at a firm right now.
Nice.
She's one of the topmost producing account executives in Canada. So I have enough and more proof or data to show people that females are as good, if not better, than males in sales.
That's amazing.
It's a simple evolutionary fact that females can feel empathy easier and they can connect to people just a little bit easier than males. And it's easier for females to be a little bit more vulnerable. And so that's why I feel, this whole concept of females not being in sales,
Yeah.
if people choose to believe in it, it's their call. I can't challenge it. But in my personal life, I've seen enough and more examples that tell me that there is no differentiation, and gender is not even like, you shouldn't even think about this while hiring or while like even, and too many examples, man. Indra Nui, there are too many people out there who've just challenged the status quo, who've challenged this mindset and been amazing at what they do. So there, it's been solved for. If you don't choose to see the reality, then it's your call. But there are enough and more examples. Now let's come to the more controversial bit about the color of the skin. So, and honestly, I've gotten this feedback a lot of times when when I shifted from India to North America and started selling here. A lot of people, and okay, let me define people. So there are two kinds of people. One is a toxic person, and one is a well-intentioned person. And what do I mean by a toxic or a well-intentioned? How I see the two kinds of people is one who saps my energy and one who gives me energy. That's my definition of a toxic. Like, somebody who's toxic for me might not be toxic for others. I might be toxic for them. Completely okay. But I have to design my life. So I choose to be with people who give me energy. And there are a lot of, and I'm not even talking about toxic people here. So a lot of hate will come from that segment of people. It's completely okay. It's like the story of Buddha. He says that people have come to give you a gift, and it's a long story, one of my favorite ones. They have come to give you a gift. You can choose to not accept the gift and let them roll in that negativity. It's not, but in reality, what do we do is we accept the gift, think about it, make it 10x inside us, and become negative.
That is so true.
And that's pointless.
Yeah.
So forget about that. But okay, when a lot of well-intentioned people gave me this feedback, that probably, so I tried to understand their worldview first, because I knew it was not coming from a racist or a negative space. Maybe they're helping me to understand something. And I just asked, okay, what do you mean by white versus brown? What do you feel like? Why do you have this mindset? And what I realized was, it was not about the color. Color was probably a correlation, but it was about context. If you've not grown up here, if you've not seen the life the way they see life, like a normal American sees life, if you've not been to their schools, if you don't talk to them in the language they understand, so how do you, like, their question is, how do you build rapport? How do you connect to them? And the fact is, people buy from people that are similar to them. That's a fact.
Yeah.
Or maybe that's my fact. There is no absolute fact. But it's like, okay, I understood this. So the first thing that I started doing when I moved to Canada was, and started selling in the US, I started building a network on LinkedIn. Like, I assumed people don't know IITs and IIMs here. My ideas might be very welcome in India, but since nobody really knows me here, and they don't know what geo is, they don't know the places I have worked at, I mean, there is no reason for them to trust me and to build on my ideas. So let's build a network first. I connected with a lot of folks in North America.
Yeah.
And the beauty of being in this country is that, I'll give an example. I reached out to Mark Roberge, who is the ex-CRO of HubSpot, an engineer. He was a mentor to me unofficially because I loved his book, The Sales Acceleration Formula. He's an engineer who scaled HubSpot to where this is. So I could look up to him as a mentor, and I just reached out to him, cold outreach, like I reached out to you or you reached out to me on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
He responded to me and he taught me so many things that I needed to learn at that point in time. And this is about 3 to 4 years back. So if you try to understand the context well, if you've spent enough time to live this life, and I'll be becoming a Canadian citizen in like another 15 days. So, and I've lived this life. I know what's the difference between selling in India. I actually coach founders now based in India who are trying to sell in North America. I'm like, okay, let's understand the difference. What do they mean by context? What are they trying to solve for? Indians, no matter what value you create, it's just in our DNA that we try to optimize for return on investment. We try to get discounts. We try to just make sure we are not spending more than we should be spending, right? We're trying to solve for value. in a certain way or price.
Yeah.
And that was true for my sales as well. No matter how much value I could create, how much cost of inaction, how much ROI I could quantify, it all boiled down to, okay, how much discount will you give? And it is in our DNA. I can think of a lot of ads that have probably drilled this into our subconscious. But what does a North American do? And I've lived that life. Like here, when I shifted, I was a workaholic back in India. I was a workaholic in Canada. But I noticed that I am not productive because there is a lot of stuff to do at home. I need to wash my utensils. I need to clean my home. I need to do pretty much everything on my own. There is no external help. And I am solving for time. So a born and bred American will probably value his time over everything else. So he or she doesn't really care about a lot of small talk. If you go into their pains, I mean, they do care about the small talk, but if you go into their pains and if you help them understand, okay, this particular solution will save you 2 hours in your day, and imagine what you could do in those 2 hours. This particular solution will probably make it convenient for your team to communicate better in a remote world. So, like, it's solving for convenience, and they're not concerned about price. Discounting is not even a thing here. I have never discounted my deals in the US and in Canada. In fact, I have sold them at a premium, and people have been willing to pay that premium because they saw, like, it was not just me speaking about the cost of inaction or the ROI. They saw themselves in their own experience that, yes, this makes sense. I can probably reach this. And I was never promising the sun and the moon and the stars. I was always telling them, maybe this works, maybe this doesn't. If this doesn't work, here is how to de-risk it from your perspective. Because that's another big thing. Like, you're selling to businesses, but you're eventually selling to people. And if in an enterprise sale, they might be buying $500,000 worth of your solution, but they're putting their job on the line for you.
Yeah.
So they need to trust you. And why do you believe these outcomes will come? And there are a lot of de-risking methodologies. So, I mean, it's not, in my head, it's not a function of color. In my head, it's a function of context. If you or me, we have lived here, we have lived this life, we have felt the same pain, we have experienced life as these people experienced, there is a very high probability that we'll be able to build that rapport. And I have a lot of North American friends, right? I have been to their homes. I have seen what they do on a daily basis. I have seen what they've done. And I think of myself as a Canadian now. Like, I think in English. I don't even think in Hindi anymore. When I go back to India, I mean, I feel like an alien sometimes. I feel like, okay, it might sound weird that I used to judge people as a kid who used to come from maybe the US or Europe. I used to say, oh, these people are random and they say random stuff. Yeah. And I feel almost the same stuff right now. Like, I can see dust there. It's a very controversial thing, but
no, I love the way you took the argument of, it's not about the color, it's actually about the context. It's a very beautifully said, and that mindset, it's a positive mindset, how you're breaking it down, like how the buyer's their thing, why the context, why the concern is coming from, and you try to learn that. So how do you overcome this bias is by working towards like that, working toward and what environment you're selling to, trying to learn about that environment and trying to being helpful early on. Some of the things that you mentioned, I think this is phenomenal. We're coming to the close here. One question I always want to ask, with the modern sales and modern SaaS experience that we all want to provide and we want to push the industry forward, what is one piece of advice that most of the sales or other salespeople are giving that you disagree with and you think from a different perspective, because that's the modern way of doing things now?
Interesting question. One thing, I would say, using presentations during discovery. I mean, that's different things work for different people. But I have found, and I've reviewed a lot of calls. I've not just my teams, but other people's teams, and talked to a lot of these people. And I've always looked at A players, and I've always asked this question, okay, do you show a lot of presentations during your discovery, or do you jump to the product demo very early on in your sales cycle? And the most common theme I have found is a lot of A players don't really show product demos like very early on. Like, they're just focused on the discovery bit.
Yeah.
And they don't And I personally never showed a presentation till the time. I mean, I worked at fashions as well. The market is a very fashion-oriented visual market. So I did use some visual cues to guide them. But mostly, I've shied away from using any kind of presentations because it prevents me from really looking at your non-verbal cues. If I'm looking at the presentation, it prevents me from seeing when your eyes are lighting up. At what point? What is that aha moment for you? What is that pain that you really feel? And then go deeper into it. So I've kind of, and I have coached a lot of sellers successfully to not show presentations, to focus on that conversation, to not follow any kind of a templated list of questions, because then you will miss a lot of stuff. It's good to have that template to start with, but over time you should build that muscle that you'll know when to zoom in or zoom out of a particular pain point, of a particular discussion, and when to go deeper or when to redirect. And all of that is not possible with a presentation.
Very well said. I've literally sat, I think, a month or 2 months ago in a sales demo, and it was number of logos backed by this, funded this much, all the presentation. I'm like, I don't care any of this stuff.
Exactly.
Let's get to the meat. But it's still happening. It's the bad practice is still there, and we need to evolve that. Aman, thank you very much for amazing content, that advice that you shared with the team and with the audience here. And I think I love the way you explain some of the concept and you broke it down always. So there's a lot more that I'm going to go back and listen and try to think about some of the things as well. And if people want to connect with you, where can they find you?
LinkedIn, or just email me at aman@coachAman.me. Or like the easiest way is to just send me a ping on LinkedIn. I'm super active on LinkedIn. And one problem disclaimer, I feel like I was just recapping the entire conversation in my head. And I feel like I just spoke probably 80% of the time, and 20% of the time was probably you spoke, or maybe 90-10. And this is the thing I actively coach against. But this was more of a discussion. Probably in a discovery, you should speak as a seller about 40 to 50% of the time, and let the other people speak most of the time, and you should just ask questions. So I was just thinking about it. So I just...
No, this was your show. This was the stage where you were supposed to share your wisdom and knowledge. So you're all good. So,
but there is a way, like if you frame it in questions, it's usually better. But yeah, appreciate that. And sorry for cutting you there.
No. This is all good. Thanks again, everyone, for listening to and tuning in. And we will again come back with another amazing guest in the next episode. Until then, subscribe to our podcast on different channels on YouTube and Spotify where we are listed. And like us and give us comments, so that let us know if there anything that you learned from this episode, any additional topics that you have, so I can make sure I can invite some additional guests based on those questions as well. Thanks again. Until next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Cheers.